in emergency management, in a sense that I've had some experience at the smaller county level where resources are maybe a little bit more limited than where I'm at now. And then I'm also a firefighter and paramedic. So prior to joining emergency management, firefighting and paramedic is where I was led to, and did that for a few years before being an emergency manager for about 6 total now. My educational background, I went to Kirkwood Community College in Cedar Rapids. I got my associates in fire science, paramedic from the University of Iowa, and then my bachelor's degree in public administration ending about 2017. And Samantha, you might have to chime in if there are questions via chat, since I don't have the space on my screen to see both. Feel free to interrupt me. So my goals today are to talk about the background and structure of the emergency management in Iowa, and then discuss what the roles of the emergency management coordinator are. Hopefully doing that provides you guys some resources and some context to what our role is and how you can integrate with us. That's really the main focus of today. And then we'll also talk about briefly on emergency preparedness and planning initiatives. Okay, so structure and governance of emergency management in Iowa is kind of unique when compared to the nation as a whole. So in Iowa, we have our own code section that specifies how emergency management is to be conducted. Emergency management, despite having our county names in the emergency management agency title, are not actually directly connected to county government. Emergency management agencies are governed by what's called an emergency management commission. So that commission is a group of board members that's made up from mayors, 1 member from the board of supervisor, and the county sheriff. So every jurisdiction in the city, or every city in a specific county, will have a mayor that can be on that commission, or they could designate someone, and then 1 member from the board of supervisors and the county sheriff. So it's basically the number of jurisdictions, cities that you have, plus 2 for those other 2 members, and that makes up a commission. Commission sizes vary, and in our case, Dallas County's commission is 20. So we have 18 municipal jurisdictions, and then again, 2 members from the county. And that governance from the commission helps to provide direction in the delivery of emergency management services to each of those jurisdictions. So we serve all of those in our county, just as other county emergency management agencies do. Some counties have smaller commissions, less cities equals smaller commission. But generally, they all have the same sort of mission that we're providing emergency management services across those 5 phases that you see on the screen here: mitigation, preparedness, response, recovery, and prevention. And so that's primarily the focus of where we're going with commissions and the agencies that they direct. To give you a graphical example, and hopefully you can see the mouse here as I slide it across the screen, these top 2 lines represent all of the cities in the county in Dallas. And so those make up the commission. The commission then is the governing agency or governing authority over the emergency management agency, which is the entity that I work for. So commission guides for us more of an administrative role. They provide general direction, and then they leave it to the coordinator and program staff to facilitate that direction throughout the year. So as I mentioned, Iowa code requires an emergency management commission to be established. And the best part about this is that there's 1 for every county. Some parts of Iowa have combined commissions. So my neighbors down here on the map in Adair and Guthrie counties, they actually share a commission, so they were able to combine. There are a few other instances across the state of Iowa where those entities are combined, but generally speaking, each county will have its own. It is important to note that agencies are staffed at various levels. So depending on what function that agency is doing locally, depending on the needs of the jurisdiction, the staffing level can change drastically. So for us in Dallas County, for example, we have two. Our neighbors in Polk, I think, have 4 or 5. Lynn County, 5, I believe, and kind of get the picture there. So there are also some programs where emergency management coordinators are part-time. So they maybe don't have a full-time coordinator in those counties. Our programs generally are divided into regions. So a lot of the coordination that we do is done on a regional basis. You can see the map there, which kind of breaks out the regions. We're also affiliated or indirectly affiliated with our state Homeland Security partners. We have a close working relationship with them in how we deliver emergency management services. So a close connection there that helps to bridge the state to local gap. And I mentioned emergency management commissions aren't direct county entities. They are, however, generally located within county offices. So if you're searching for your emergency manager, a lot of times you'll find them in common places, courthouse, administration buildings. Our facility is Dallas County Human Service Campus, as an example. So part of Iowa code specific to emergency management commissions designates functional responsibilities to the emergency management agency to perform. The box in the red below shows what those responsibilities are, and I'll kind of touch on each of them at a high level. So administration, emergency management programs have their own budget process, very similar to municipality. So we have to adopt a budget, we have to provide public notice, we have to provide a public hearing, hear those comments, and then certify the budget to the funding authority. We also perform hazard analysis, which drives much of what we do. Most of your jurisdictions are probably already involved with emergency management in some way through hazard analysis. One of the ways that we do this is through our hazard mitigation plan. So what that does is on a 5-year basis, look at the community profile, look at threats and hazards that exist, and then defines a strategy of how we might mitigate against those threats. That also makes us eligible for some grant funding, which a lot of jurisdictions take advantage of to minimize those risks in their community. We're also tasked with resource management. So part of the local, regional, state process is that we try to utilize the resources on the most efficient basis possible. And so maintaining an effective resource management program where we know and understand our local resources allows us to most effectively place them during disasters or any time that they're needed. From a planning perspective, we have what's called a comprehensive emergency plan. This covers a wide range, pretty much anything you can think of. They're broken down generally into 15 functional categories like transportation, mass care, public health, firefighting, law enforcement, and so on. We are required to have a method for control and coordination. So during a disaster, how we are working with local entities that are actually boots on the ground and delivering some of those emergency response services. Part of that also includes damage assessment. So the federal declaration process through the federal government includes thresholds for what damages are required to be declared. And so one of those tasks, one of the things that we do is roll up our local numbers as a county to the state to be put together as a kind of bigger puzzle to be sent off to FEMA or in the president ultimately for a federal disaster declaration. So we play a pretty integral role in rolling up that data to get those resources from the federal level down to the local level. Communication and warning, which includes a lot of counties in Iowa have mass notification services to be able to provide information to residents regarding specific incidents. Operations and procedures. So as part of that planning process, how are we conducting our operations? Training and exercise, which are two of my most favorite. So once we've developed the plan, we have to have a method and a process for providing training and then validating that training through exercise. So the exercise plan can be comprehensive in nature. Typically, starts crawl, walk, run approach. So we start with small scale exercises where you might be sitting around a table just talking about how you might deal with a specific emergency. And then maybe the next year you actually start to implement some of those procedures while you're doing an exercise, and then really validate if they're working or not. And then the last component is public education and information, which is providing almost a year-round preparedness campaign, and really the foundation of all preparedness rests within our citizens' hands. So the more we can have citizens prepared on the front side, really the less disasters become when they're initiated. So from a daily perspective, some of the things that we do in Dallas County, and just kind of real brief here. So general coordination on a daily basis includes assessing our hazards, risks, and then developing action strategies based on those hazards. So a lot of emergency managers do this. Might look a little bit different. I'll talk about that picture on the bottom right here in a second, but as part of that hazard identification process, every day we monitor various hazards, man-made, natural disasters, or technological type incidents, and then evaluate if something needs to be done about them or if it's a monitoring type situation. And that varies considerably based on the day, based on the weather, that sort of thing. For severe weather, for example, if it's looking like we might have severe weather, one of our functions in the agency is we coordinate the deployment of storm spotters. So we help to collect that information, what's happening on the ground, and then roll it up to the National Weather Service, who actually uses that information to better tailor some of their products and future warnings that they're putting out. That picture on the bottom right that I mentioned is actually what we call our Emergency Operations Center or Watch Center. So we operate this on a daily basis. You can kind of see up on some of the screens there, we've got maps of, I think the big board there is looking at weather, and then we have some smaller screens that are showing just some ancillary type hazard identification, threat identification type items. The other things that we do on a daily basis is a lot of the federal grants for preparedness, public assistance are run through the state of Iowa, and part of being a local emergency manager is that we get to help facilitate the work through that process. It can be difficult at times. There's a lot of process related to the federal ones. So a lot of helping out our jurisdictions with turning in the right information and getting them the right information to solve the issue that they're facing and what they're trying to seek the grant for. One of the biggest things that we do is develop relationships and resources. So this could be as simple as a small conversation with an individual, or a conversation with a bigger group, a committee, anything like that. We're then going to take those conversations and turn those practices into plans and procedures. So turning that kind of strategic view of this is how we want this to go into an actual directive of how it might be done. The other things that we do are facilitate training and exercise, kind of like I talked about earlier in that progressive cycle. So a lot of recently what we've been working on is active threat type incidents following some of the school shootings that happened late last year. And then last, which is a small portion of what we do here in Dallas County, is respond to emergencies. Responding to emergencies definitely varies based on the type of incident. And I do know that based on the county size and the staffing of the agency, is that can also vary based on the local resources. So I know there's other emergency managers in other parts of Iowa that respond to more incidents than we do, certainly. And that's based on hazard analysis and resource need. So one of the things that we do from a training perspective is we develop that training plan based on responders' needs and then local shortfalls. So as part of those conversations that we have with community partners and resources, we develop ideas of what are areas where we're lacking on training. Are we lacking in the integration? Are we lacking with actually trying out the training, meaning exercise. And then also could be based on new plans. So if there's a new initiative that rolls out, could be based on that as well. On the top right here, you'll see a class that we've hosted with our jurisdiction on wide area search. And so this kind of a niche piece of what we do, but this is a post-disaster type search. So we're looking for victims and assessing the true impact of the event. On the bottom there, you'll see an exercise that we facilitated over the summer, mass casualty incident, where we simulated about 15 patients and set up our responders to come respond to, work together, and solve the issues. From a response standpoint, so we respond based on the need. As I indicated, some of the other emergency managers have identified needs higher or lower thresholds than what we do. So they might respond to more things that we do. But to give you an example, a few things that we've done, remote support to jurisdictions. So whether that be a cyber attack, a single family house fire, or just some questions on specific items that are present in the community, or hazards are present in the community at the time. We also have field response. So if for whatever reason the support that we provide over the phone or via email isn't sufficient, then we can go in the field and provide direct support. And then that last level of support, that kind of highest level, is called the Emergency Operations Center. And that's that room that I showed a few slides ago. What we do there is we'll bring in subject matter experts from each of the disciplines, so each of the functional areas of our plan, and essentially form a team together and collaboratively work on whatever issue might be present. On the top left there, you'll see a room with a bunch of projectors. That's actually Polk County Emergency Operations Center during one of the planned events over last summer, I believe. On the top right, that'd be a field response example following the derecho. This was a store that had the wall blown out from the extreme winds. And then on the bottom there, some PPE distribution as we kind of dealt with for a couple of years during COVID. Okay, so now that we've talked about what we do as a local emergency manager, this is my encouragement to you, is we come with a lot of resources, and it can be difficult at times to prioritize which resource to talk to, which connection to make a priority today. I would encourage you to schedule a meeting with your local emergency manager and discuss your role and their role. Help understand how they support you as a jurisdiction, as a library, and then discuss how you might support them at the same time. Excuse me. And discuss how your facility is open to supporting emergency operations. So one of the things that we have in Dallas County is called a warm and cold cooling center or warming center plan. And what we do with that is we'll engage our libraries when it's looking like it's going to be extreme weather type instances and give some people some ability and kind of publish that relief from the heat. We're not advertising them as shelters or anything like that. It's public space that we encourage people to go utilize if they just want to break from their home environment where they might not have the resources, fiscal or otherwise, to keep up with the temperature conditions. One of the things that's important when meeting the emergency manager is to talk about the things that are important to you. So talking about your threats, vulnerabilities, and weaknesses is really important, because it can help emergency managers shape resources to maybe help solve your need, whether that be planning or community resources that you could be connected to. Okay, I'm going to shift over to emergency planning perspective. So emergency planning is really important to me. The fifth bullet there, preparedness turns emergencies into minor inconveniences, is probably one of my favorite quotes, because it really does. If you have a single family home and you lose water, even if you're on city water, you lose water for a day because of a water main break that's outside of your control. If you have 2, 3, 4 gallons at home of water, it's a minor inconvenience. Instead of not having water, you just walk to the basement, bring up the gallon jugs, and then continue on. But if you don't have any of those things, you could be rushing to the store. If it's a snowstorm or something else, there's other impacting factors that might negatively impact that emergency experience. So to be certain, preparedness helps to turn those events into minor inconveniences. So from an emergency planning perspective, one of the things that is also important is establishing that known framework of incidents. So I don't fully understand I'll be the first to admit, don't understand the functions of all the functions of the library, but identifying how you're going to manage incidents, and especially if you have staff, communicating with staff on these are the things that are important, these are the expectations, can help get you through an incident in a minor inconvenience level rather than a major disaster. One of the things that emergency planning also does is, as you're going through this process, it allows for some non-clouded decision making that includes how you might use mitigation measures, things that are going to lessen the impact, or resources that you might use. One of the things that we see often is there's emergency plans, but they don't necessarily reference any action thresholds. So that one of the comments that I have on here, bullet points, is that when you're considering things like flooding, especially if you're in a flood-prone area, consider what levels would require you to implement your emergency response plan. So if, let's say that our library is at river gauge 15 feet, whichever community we're in, and if it hits 13 feet, we need to be taking action so that we can effectively mitigate whatever is coming our way. And the real important part of this too is planning ultimately gets you back on your feet faster. So by planning, you're implementing mitigation strategies, you're implementing faster response, and you're allowing the community to continue to utilize the space that they use and effectively recover. So there's a few phases here, and we'll kind of dive deep into them in the next couple slides. So first one is probably the most important, is you need to perform a hazard analysis. Hazard analysis drives everything that we do, from emergency response planning through continuity, all the way through recovery. So the hazard analysis piece is very important. We want to make sure that hazards that we're predicting or anticipating are based on realistic threats, and not something that maybe wouldn't ever happen. Earthquakes, I guess I can't say that across all of Iowa, but in portions of Iowa, earthquakes, for example, are not very likely. Next piece is the emergency response planning. So this helps to get you through an incident, how you're going to respond to the incident. The following piece is continuity planning. So how are you going to continue operations as a facility? And then the last piece, which is the ultimate goal, is recovery. So how do you get back to normal, or the new normal, as soon as possible? Okay, so from the emergency planning process, this looks like a lot of steps, but some of these can be combined into one meeting. Again, it can look very daunting, but I would encourage you to use the resources you have at the local emergency management agency if you want help planning for these types of things. So step one is that you're going to form a collaborative planning team that could include things like community members, maybe some of your elected officials if they're interested, obviously you as a director or administrator of the organization, and then any other staff that you think are appropriate to have in that group to help paint what some of the objectives are of the situation. The next piece is identify those threats and hazards, as I talked about, and then identify what risk you have against those threats and hazards. So if the hazard is severe weather, The risk is that, we could lose our facility, and risk is really painting what your potential losses are. Step 3 is determining goals and objectives. So determining your operational priorities. So again, don't know a whole lot about library administration, but determine what are your most important things in that facility. Taking a step back to step 2, as you're assessing your risk, one of the things that I like to do with my jurisdictions is I'll give them note cards and say, give me your top 5 most pressing incidents, the things that keep you up at night or you're scared about. And I take those each back from the whole team. And there's typically some overlap, and then there's typically some extras on top of that. And then I'll take those, prioritize the ones that were repeated, and then that helps to determine what our most pressing priorities are from an operational standpoint. From there, you'll set goals and objectives. So, for example, we want to ensure that the library is able to be evacuated in X amount of time. We want to make sure that as an objective, we get people to a safe sheltering point. And maybe that means abandoning the library and finding an alternate point, maybe a church or some other community center nearby. Then you'll take kind of that discussion and turn it into the plan. So you'll develop a formal course of action, identify the resources that you need to take that action, and information and intelligence needs, which would be like in my storm example, just being aware of a severe weather event. So having a weather radio, having multiple ways to receive weather alerts. Next thing is you're going to write and review the plan and then approve and disseminate it. So dissemination should be to anybody that's really has an active plan role in that piece. So if it's all of your staff that have an expectation within that plan, then all of your staff need to be aware of that and then be trained on it. A lot of times we miss the training component. We'll develop a plan on paper, in writing, it looks great. We'll distribute it to our staff, our members, and then we'll expect that they understand it this exact same way we did without having those prior conversations. And then when we go to exercise or actually experience an emergency, is we'll find that they didn't have the same expectations. So a really important piece is that training component. Once you've established a training component and you feel confident that the training's been well delivered, is a good time to exercise. So again, we try that crawl, walk, run approach and start with a small exercise, maybe a drill, which can lead into something bigger, and then eventually into a full-scale exercise where you're moving equipment and those types of things, if that's something that you're interested in. After the exercise, again, important piece is that you learn from that process. And so if you've identified things in the exercise that maybe didn't go as well as you thought they did or thought that they wanted to, time to revise that plan, get it back out, make changes so that that's better delivered. So from a continuity perspective, I like to put this after the emergency plan because to me, you have to get through the emergency and effectively respond so that you can most effectively perform continuity. So again, continuity is that continuation of your functions and the essential things that you want to do. So essential functions for a library, again, not an expert at the library administration, but the things that are most important to serve your jurisdiction or your citizens. So whether that be, checking in and out books, consideration of fees or anything like that, the things that are most important, you want to make sure you have a plan to continue those functions, maybe outside of your impacted environment. So one of those components is making a succession plan. So I might be in charge of our agency today, but let's say that I get sick tomorrow, and who's in charge to lead our agency? So one of those things of continuity is identifying who can make decisions in the absence of others that are generally making decisions. You also want to identify your essential records and materials as part of that process, any alternate facilities. And I understand a lot of this is difficult, especially for smaller jurisdictions, but potential alternate facilities so you can continue to operate, continue to pay staff, those types of things. I'm from Cedar Rapids, and I think during the 2008 floods, they ended up relocating some of their library to other facilities, which ended up being a more long-term event because of the impact level that that downtown library experienced due to flooding. And then you also want to consider how you're going to communicate. And this could be internally and externally. How are you communicating with stakeholders? How are you communicating with your staff, et cetera? So I put together just a real brief kind of brain exercise here. So if I told you that tomorrow you could have 4 to 5 inches of water on the ground level of the library due to excessive rainfall of 4 to 6 inches overnight, and the ground's already saturated. So that'd be due to flash flooding. How would you prioritize, and what would your priorities be? What resources would you need to utilize those priorities? And then what actions would you take with all of that to effectively respond to the incident? So I like to paint situations like this, scenarios that are plausible and realistic based on the threats and the hazards that are present, and then kind of test against them as we're evaluating our planning process and our resources. One of the other things that you can do, as I mentioned, getting an emergency manager involved throughout this process is advantageous. But as part of getting them involved, I think you'll find that we can partner together on a lot of things. Public preparedness campaigns where we're handing out materials, just giving presentations to community groups. I threw a snippet up from just a month or two ago that I did at one of our local libraries that I thought was a great opportunity to share what we did as an agency and kind of help share some preparedness information as well. We also host preparedness courses pretty often. So maybe your facility is one of the better facilities to host a class if that's something that you're interested in, even as just a facility offering, maybe if you're not even interested in the content. Some of the other emergency management functions that I've talked about, serving as a recovery center. So we talked about warming and cooling centers, but beyond warming and cooling, once a disaster strikes, there's a lot of information that citizens need. And so maybe we can utilize through partnerships those library facilities to help serve as a one-stop shop per se to get citizens the information that they need. All right, so I am closing here, and then I think there should be an affiliate from emergency management almost at each site, and I'll go back a slide in a second so you can see who that's going to be. I think as we talked, and hopefully you guys recognize, the libraries can benefit from the implementation of emergency and continuity plans. I think it's important to recognize that your jurisdiction might be small, some might be large, but every jurisdiction can really benefit from this. Once you put it together, it's, you just need to kind of tend to it every now and then. It's a little bit of a process initially, but once you have it established, it's a lot easier, especially to sleep at night when you know that something's going to be done like you want it to be. Preparedness is an intentional act, and it starts individually. So, you can't respond to the library as an incident if you're not able to respond to your own incident. So I think one of the things that some of the local affiliates will talk about is personal preparedness and the steps that you can take as an individual to help prepare yourself to be able to help serve in this capacity if it were also needed. And my challenge to you is to really start the process. Really important, obviously, as what we've talked about the whole time here. It can be easy to push off. but it's really, once you get going in the process, it's advantageous for years to come. The smallest jurisdiction that I have that's implemented emergency preparedness and emergency planning is about 300 people. So, again, regardless of the size, they can benefit. I think the larger jurisdictions that we have, greater than 70,000, also have seen the same benefit with emergency planning. So locally, I think there should be a few emergency managers showing up soon, or pretty close to soon if they're not already. You can kind of see their names here on the list. So I did want to give them a thank you for being willing to go out to each of these sites, since obviously I can't be in each of them at the same time. One revision to this is the Northeast Central Rivers AEA will be Chase Babcock from Grundy County instead of Mindy Benson. And it looks like we have some questions. You want me to just take those, Samantha, or?
Yeah, that would be great.
All right. So I apologize. I don't know where these questions are coming from, which region, but so the question is, did we understand correctly that you or your organization will come to a library and if they suffer some kind of disaster and help with the assessment? From a damage assessment point, yes, we will help assess what damages are present. I will say that we're not subject matter experts, as I kind of alluded to through the presentation. We're not subject matter experts at the cost of library materials and those types of things. So the damage assessment that we're going to be doing is going to be very much focused on building structure costs. The other thing that's helpful is if you know what the inventory of your books are and like what the cost is. One of the nice things about the federal declaration process is that through public assistance, which is funding to governmental entities following a disaster, provided we've met a declaration threshold, is that as a library, generally you can be eligible for reimbursement of those costs and damages. So whether that be, physical goods inside the facility that have been lost due to flooding or whatever the incident is, or if it's the physical structure itself. So kind of two parts that question. Hopefully I answered it well enough. Is there a cost from someone from our county agency, such as yours, to come to the library and do a presentation? So from our agency, no. And the majority of agencies, I would say no. Probably all of them, but that's something that I can't answer for everybody, obviously. So I would encourage you to reach out, make that local connection. And probably 100% of the time, they're going to say no. It's just a matter of getting it in on the schedule. Sometimes, especially one-person emergency management agencies can be kind of busy. So it can be hard to fit a slot in exactly where you want it. Next question. How long can you safely store a sealed gallon of water? That's a great question. I typically, so personal preparedness, I have 4 family members. We have at least 3 gallons per family member. So FEMA says have a gallon of water per person per day for 3 days. So just figure 3 gallons. I have a combination. So I actually use water bottles. So I think it's 8 water bottles make 1 gallon. And then the other piece is actual gallons. And I just use the expiration that's on the container. So if it's 2 years, I'll just kind of rotate through stock, especially like if we're using bottles of water occasionally when we go on family outings or just long car rides or whatever. I'll just kind of rotate through that and kind of minimize any waste with water. All right. Our library uses internet-based VoIP phones. Is this a good precaution to have phone lines in place that a phone line with long distance capability? Currently, we do not have any phones prepared for this purpose. That's definitely something to consider. It depends, what. So obviously, the hazard would be, potential loss of phones. You want to consider alternative measures. So check with your IT department or whoever's operating the phones and, hey, are these backed up if we lose power? Ours in the county, we're backed up with batteries for a short term and then a generator for a long term. So we have that capability. Definitely something to check on. And then the other thing is, if you do have outages, it's up to you, I guess, if you find it necessary to have a redundant means of phone connectivity. So obviously every procedure, hazard mitigation, any action that we take has some sort of cost to it, whether it be fiscal cost or just a choice cost. But that's something to consider. Hate to refer everybody to their emergency managers, but really if you talk locally to an emergency manager, they're going to help be able to phrase these in appropriate conversation and have you think through those processes.
I think maybe the question there, AJ, reading between the lines, might be a little more like, if cell service goes down, like what do we do if we can't use our cell phones or an internet-based phone, like backup communication? So I don't know if power is really the issue, but maybe more on the cell side. And again, the answer is probably like work locally to find those resources.
Landline.
Yeah, so yeah, landline could help with that if that's the instance. I guess it's you could do a radio. There's a lot of solutions out there, and again, I don't want to constantly refer you to the local EMA, but they might be able to help tailor a solution better than what I could probably answer based on the information in the question. Okay, can you talk a little bit about how you, an emergency preparedness pro, are prepared at home for an emergency? Well, I'm honored to be considered an emergency preparedness pro. So one of the things that I did a couple of years ago is Safeguard Iowa Partnership. They're a nonprofit entity, private public kind of partnership in Iowa. They put together what's called a 20 Weeks to Preparedness initiative. And I share this often with my communities. It's basically a once a week checklist to buy 3 or 4 things from the store to help bolster your emergency preparedness. So what I have is a combination of household tools, tarps, duct tape, some canned food, enough for my whole family for more than 3 days. And then trying to think what else is in there. Water, like you mentioned, some of the other essential items. So I followed that preparedness chart, and it really helps to kind of set you up for success. We've had instances recently in the last 6 months where it's like, oh, hey, we needed a tarp, for example, and I actually had it. So it was nice to have in that kit, was able to use it. Just the important part is making sure you put it back. So that's and I can share that link with you, Samantha, and you can resend it out if you'd like. With all the talk about nuclear war, what are there plans for communities to follow? I don't know about any specific plans to be enacted during nuclear war, so I probably can't answer that very well. As far as our community plans, one of the nice things that we do, I talked about our comprehensive plan that's broken up into functional areas. We're not really specific in any like certain type of emergency. The nice part about doing that is it's almost like a menu at a restaurant. Depending on how you're feeling or what's going on, you can pick certain elements off of that. And so what we'll end up doing during any sort of emergency operations center activation is we'll pick individual resources and their policies or plans to establish them to solve whatever incident that we have actively going on. I think that's the last question.
That is the last question I see in the chat. And I don't see anyone else here in my location that is raising hands. So we'll wait just a couple more moments. I'm kind of curious, when we're going to dig into our plans here a little bit more this afternoon. So thanks for laying out all this info. But and maybe your last question kind of answered this. Like, when do those plans get triggered? What is a disaster? What qualifies as an emergency? How do we begin to think about, oh, this is an emergency, I better get out my emergency plan?
Yeah, so that comes down to identifying your hazards and the risk. So like the flooding example I gave, which I don't remember the exact numbers, but the metric of 13 feet and flooding is 15 feet for us is important. The metric for a severe thunderstorm or a tornado warning is pretty straightforward, and that somebody else is actually giving you that information of there's a tornado warning. So that would be your activation threshold to take action. Again, it's going to kind of vary based on what your threats are. We have a small snippet in one of our plans for cyber. So one of the things that our cyber plan includes is number one, some precautionary items. Like if you find a flash drive on the ground, don't just pick it up and throw it in your computer to figure out what's on it and get it back to the right person. Could be a virus. Yeah. So the other thing that it talks about is, let's say that you have some sort of malicious activity occur on your computer. What's the initial steps that you should be taking? How are you notifying your IT department? How are they going to respond? Those types of things. And some of that might be outside of the library's scope, but at least the front side is important to consider as part of that process.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about a cyber emergency super in depth, but that's a really good point. Kind of along that line, then I'll make this our last question before we transition to the local times. What, in your opinion, is like so you mentioned one next action is start to get prepared, contact those local people. Is there a certain piece of the planning process that you would ask libraries to have top of mind that maybe would not have crossed their radar yet?
I think the most important thing is just starting the process. Like I mentioned, I do the note card technique, where I'll take a note card, give one to every member of the planning committee, and say, write down your threat. And then, I mean, you could take it that day, take that same note card and say, how are we going to handle, let's say a severe thunderstorm warning is on that list, or tornado impacting the facility is on that list. You can look at it that day, and that should spark some interest of, wow, we really don't have a plan for this. Sure would be nice to figure out where we're going to go with it and how we're going to respond. So I think just starting, once you start to put those, there's always something to be said about putting something in writing. Once you put those hazards on paper and then kind of measure up against them and where you're at today, I think you'll soon recognize that there's some work to be done on the planning front.
Absolutely. Well, I know you can't see everyone's video, AJ. You should be able to see Clarinda here, if everyone can wave. And I can see Jay, who's in North Central, so you guys can wave. But you really did give a presentation to about 200 librarians today, even if it felt like me alone. But we really are thankful to you for your time, and of course to everyone locally who's hopped in. Marianne says, I'm not going to move my laptop for fear of disconnecting something, but we're all here and very appreciative. And that's at the Johnston Public Library near Des Moines. So I will, at this point, I'm going to turn it over to the local folks. And again, just a huge thank you to AJ for the work that he does around the state, and everyone on those many teams. We all know that Iowa loves its local control. So it is no surprise to me at all that there's a lot of small but mighty agencies working hard on this issue throughout Iowa. So thank you, everyone. And we will join back up around, I believe, 12:30 after lunch. We'll have another presentation. Rachel, I did see her on the call as well, but Rachel does bring some of that library expertise, where AJ was saying, I don't know about libraries in this, but here's some general thoughts. Rachel will have some sort of more library applicable things for us to hear after lunchtime. So thanks everyone, and we'll see you again soon.
Thanks.
Thanks, AJ. Have a great rest of your day.